He thought humiliating a grieving widow in front of her children would be easy, but the entire restaurant went dead silent the moment he violently shoved her chair. He didn't notice the man in the shadows standing up until a hand touched his shoulder and whispered a name that terrified the entire criminal underworld. Now, the predator has exactly 10 seconds to run before he becomes the prey. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. A violent shove sent Rebecca's chair skidding backward, the legs scraping against hardwood as plates rattled across the table. The restaurant fell silent, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had cut the sound from the room. Then came the whispers, low and uncertain, rippling through the crowd of diners who'd been enjoying their Saturday evening moments before. The man who'd done it, Adam Eric, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn leather jacket and dark hoodie, stood over her table with the kind of smirk that came from never being told no. His face was hard, angular, marked by old scars and fresh anger. "Remember me, Mrs. Lewis?" he said, voice dripping with false politeness that barely masked the venom underneath. "Because I sure as hell remember your husband." Rebecca didn't scream. She didn't beg. She pulled Jessica closer with one arm, her daughter's small frame trembling in a cream-colored sweater, her other hand finding Jerry's shoulder. The boy sat frozen, wide-eyed and confused, his fork still hovering over his half-eaten chicken. Rebecca looked up at Adam with fear that had nothing to do with herself. Just her children. Only her children. "Please," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "Not in front of my kids." Adam leaned closer, his boot knocking against the table leg. A water glass tipped, spilling across the wood. "Your kids?" He laughed short, bitter. "My brother had kids too. You think your husband cared about that when he—" "I don't know what you're talking about," Rebecca's voice cracked. Jessica buried her face against her mother's side, and Rebecca could feel her daughter's tears soaking through her sweater. Jerry hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just stared at the stranger looming over them like something from a nightmare. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen. A woman in the corner had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock. A man in a burgundy sweater stood halfway out of his seat, clearly debating whether to intervene. Others simply stared, phones out, recording the chaos for social media or evidence. Rebecca couldn't tell which. Adam's hand slammed down on the table, making the plates jump. "Don't play dumb with me. Your husband destroyed my family, took everything we had and walked away like it was nothing. My husband is dead." Rebecca's words came out sharper than intended, edged with grief that still felt too raw to touch. "He died 2 years ago. Cancer. Whatever you think he did." "I don't think. I know." Adam straightened, rolling his shoulders back like a fighter preparing for a match. He scanned the room, seemed to feed off the attention, the fear. He owed a debt, and debts don't die just because the man who made them does. That's when the air in the room changed. The steady click of dress shoes on hardwood cut through the tension, too deliberate to be casual, too measured to be rushed. Rebecca heard it first, felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. A few heads turned toward the entrance. Adam, caught up in his own performance, didn't notice. The man approaching wore all black tailored slacks, a crisp, button-down shirt beneath an expensive coat that caught the restaurant's warm lighting. Dark hair, composed features, moving with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute certainty. His eyes, dark and steady, locked onto Adam's back with the focus of a predator who'd already decided how this would end. Rebecca recognized him immediately. Oliver Cordero. He stopped directly behind Adam, close enough that the temperature seemed to drop around them. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the entire restaurant like a bell. "Adam," the name hung in the air like a verdict. Adam stiffened. The smirk slid off his face, replaced by something that looked like confusion, then recognition, then pure, visceral fear. He turned slowly, and Rebecca watched his confidence collapse in real time. Oliver didn't raise his voice, didn't move, just stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, and waited. Mr. Cordero." Adam took a step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. His bravado evaporated like steam. "I didn't. I wasn't." "You weren't what?" Oliver's tone remained calm, conversational even, but there was steel underneath. "You weren't threatening a widow and her children in a public restaurant? You weren't violating rules you know exist for very specific reasons?" Adam's mouth opened, closed. He glanced around desperately, as if looking for an exit or an ally. He found neither. Oliver took one step forward. Just one. It was enough. Rebecca Lewis and her children are under my protection, Oliver said, each word precise and deliberate. They have been since the day her husband passed. You knew this. Or you should have. I didn't, no one told me. Adam's voice cracked, years of manufactured toughness crumbling. I just wanted. What you wanted, Oliver interrupted softly. Stopped mattering the moment you touched that chair. The restaurant was so quiet Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat. Jessica had stopped crying but still clung to her mother's arm. Jerry finally moved, turning to look at Oliver with the wide-eyed fascination only children have for things they don't understand. Oliver's gaze shifted briefly to Rebecca. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw something she hadn't expected: an apology. Not for Adam, but for the fact that the past had reached her at all, for failing to close every door, seal every crack. I promised him, Oliver said, still looking at Rebecca, though the words were clearly meant for Adam. And I don't break promises. He turned his attention back to Adam, and the temperature dropped another degree. You have 10 seconds to leave this restaurant. You will not contact Mrs. Lewis again. You will not speak her name. You will not acknowledge her existence. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Do you understand? Adam nodded frantically, backing toward the exit. Yes, I understand. I'm sorry, 9 seconds. Adam ran. The door swung shut behind him with a soft chime that felt absurdly cheerful given the moment. The restaurant remained frozen for another beat. Then slowly, cautiously, conversations began to resume. Silverware clinked. Someone coughed. Life trying to return to normal, though everyone knew they'd just witnessed something that couldn't be unseen. Oliver stood still for a moment longer, his eyes tracking Adam's retreat through the front windows. Satisfied, he finally turned fully to Rebecca's table and lowered himself to one knee, a deliberate choice to appear less intimidating to the children. I'm sorry, he said quietly, meeting Rebecca's eyes. I thought I'd handled everything. Rebecca couldn't find words. Her hands were shaking. Jessica peeked out from behind her mother's arm, studying Oliver with cautious curiosity. Jerry, bolder, leaned forward slightly. Are you the man Mom said was coming to dinner? Jerry asked. Oliver's expression softened just barely, but enough. Yes. And I believe we were supposed to talk about dessert. The nightmare always started the same way. Rebecca would be standing in their old kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself, and the crack in the linoleum they'd always meant to fix. Her husband would be at the stove, humming something off-key, flipping pancakes for the kids on a Sunday morning. Jessica would be laughing at the table. Jerry would be reaching for the syrup with sticky fingers. Then she'd blink, and the kitchen would be empty, the curtains gray, the crack wider, and she'd remember he was gone. Had been gone for 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Rebecca woke from the dream at 3:47 a.m., just like she had nearly every night since the funeral. The rental house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. She lay in the darkness, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of somewhere she'd never go, and tried to remember how to breathe through the grief. The bed felt too big. It always did. She'd sold their house 8 months after he died, couldn't afford the mortgage on a waitress's salary, couldn't bear to walk past his empty office every morning. This rental was smaller, cheaper, in a neighborhood where she didn't know anyone and no one asked questions. Jessica had cried for a week. Jerry had asked if Daddy would know where to find them in heaven. Rebecca had lied and said yes. She pulled herself out of bed at 4:15, knowing sleep wouldn't return. The medical bills sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left them, unopened envelopes stacked like accusations, $47,000 in debt. Even with insurance, even with the payment plans, the numbers never seemed to shrink. She made coffee in the machine her husband had bought her 3 Christmases ago, back when their biggest worry was whether Jessica would make the soccer team. The coffee tasted like ash, but she drank it anyway. By 6:30, she had the kids up and moving through their morning routine, with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that structure was the only thing keeping chaos at bay. Jessica, 9 years old now and too serious for her age, dressed herself and helped Jerry find his missing shoe. Rebecca packed lunches with whatever she could stretch from the grocery budget, peanut butter sandwiches, carrot sticks, the bruised apples she'd gotten on discount. Mom? Jessica stood in the doorway, backpack already on, looking at Rebecca with those eyes that saw too much. Are you okay? Rebecca forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. You're always tired. There wasn't accusation in Jessica's voice, just observation. The kind of painful clarity children develop when they're forced to grow up too fast. Rebecca wanted to tell her that yes, she was exhausted from working double shifts, from crying in the shower where the kids couldn't hear, from pretending that everything would be okay when she had no idea if that was true. Instead, she said, "I know, but we're managing, right?" Jessica nodded slowly, unconvinced but willing to play along. Jerry bounded into the kitchen, oblivious to the weight of the moment, and announced he'd decided to be an astronaut when he grew up. The tension broke. Rebecca drove them to school in the hand-me-down sedan that made a noise she couldn't afford to have checked, kissed them both goodbye, and watched them disappear into the building. Then she sat in the parking lot and cried for exactly 5 minutes timed on her phone, before wiping her face and driving to her shift at the diner. Work was work. Refilling coffee cups, taking orders, smiling at customers who didn't see her as a person, just a function. Her feet ached by hour 3. By hour 6, she'd stopped feeling them at all. Tips were decent $73 by the end of her shift, which meant she could put off deciding which utility bill to pay late this month. It was during her break, sitting in the back alley with a stale croissant she'd salvaged from the day-old basket, that her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Creditors had a way of calling at the worst times, but something made her pick up. "Rebecca." The voice was warm, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. "It's Oliver. Oliver Cordero. Her husband's oldest friend. The man who'd appeared at the funeral in an expensive suit, stood at the back during the service, and left an envelope with $5,000 cash and a handwritten note that simply said, "For immediate expenses, no repayment necessary." She'd tried to refuse it. He'd refused her refusal. Since then, he'd been a ghost in her life, present but invisible. Groceries would appear on her doorstep. Her car would get mysteriously serviced. Once, when her landlord tried to raise the rent, the issue had simply disappeared. Rebecca knew it was Oliver. She didn't know how to feel about it. "Oliver," she said carefully, "is everything okay? I'd like to take you and the kids to dinner, Saturday. There are some things we need to discuss." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "The future," he said simply. "And making sure the past stays buried." Rebecca's hand tightened around the phone. Her husband had never told her much about his life before they met, just fragments, late-night confessions when he thought she was asleep, stories about growing up poor, about choices made in desperation, about a friend named Oliver who'd walked the same dark roads but never found an exit. "I don't want the kids involved in whatever this is," she said quietly. "They won't be. That's the point." Oliver's voice was gentle but firm. "Your husband asked me to protect you. All of you. I'm trying to do that." Rebecca closed her eyes. She remembered the hospital room, those final days when morphine couldn't touch the pain. Her husband reaching for her hand, his grip weak but desperate. "Oliver will take care of it," he'd whispered. "Promise me you'll let him." She'd promised because dying men deserved that much. "Saturday," she said finally. "Where?" "Cordero's. 7 o'clock. Bring the kids. Order whatever they want." The call ended before she could ask the 100 questions crowding her throat. Saturday came too quickly. Rebecca stood in front of her closet, staring at clothes that felt inadequate for a restaurant she couldn't afford. She settled on a simple sweater and jeans, helped Jessica into her nicest dress, wrestled Jerry into khakis he immediately hated. They arrived early. Rebecca's anxiety wouldn't let her be late. The hostess greeted them with a knowing smile that made Rebecca's stomach tighten and led them to a quiet corner booth. "He'll be here soon," the hostess said. Rebecca ordered water and tried not to think about what the past meant, or why it needed burying at all. Oliver Cordero was 8 years old the first time he stole food. Not because he wanted to, because his stomach hurt so badly he couldn't sleep, and his mother had been passed out on the couch for 2 days straight, and there was nothing in the apartment except empty bottles and broken promises. He'd taken a loaf of bread from the corner store, tucked it under his shirt, and walked out with his heart hammering so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He'd made it 3 blocks before someone grabbed his collar. "Where are you going with that?" Oliver had frozen, certain he was about to be dragged back to the store, or worse, handed over to the police. But when he turned around, he didn't see an adult. He saw another kid, maybe a year older, with dark hair falling into serious eyes and clothes as worn as Oliver's own. The boy Thomas Lewis had studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "You're doing it wrong. Come on, that's how it started. 2 boys in a neighborhood where poverty wasn't just a condition but a life sentence, where most kids were born into struggle and never found their way out." They became inseparable not because they chose friendship, but because survival demanded it. Thomas taught Oliver how to steal properly, how to blend in, how to read body language, how to know when to run. Oliver taught Thomas how to fight, really fight, not the wild swinging most kids did, but calculated, efficient violence that ended confrontations before they started. By 12, they were running errands for the older guys in the neighborhood. Small things at first, deliveries, lookout duty, holding packages they knew better than to open. The money wasn't much, but it was more than their parents ever provided. Oliver's mother drank herself to death when he was 14. Thomas's father disappeared around the same time, leaving behind nothing but unpaid rent and a reputation for gambling debts. The boys moved into a basement apartment together, splitting the rent with money earned from increasingly dangerous work. They were 15 when they started carrying weapons, 16 when they first crossed the line from petty crime into something darker. Thomas hated it, Oliver could tell, could see it in the way his friends' hands shook after certain jobs, the way he'd stare at the ceiling at night instead of sleeping. But neither of them knew how to stop. The neighborhood had its teeth in them, and letting go meant falling into something worse. "We could leave," Thomas said one night, lying on the floor of their apartment because the mattress had bed bugs they couldn't afford to treat. "Just take what we've saved and go somewhere else. Start over." Oliver had laughed, not cruelly, but without hope. "And do what? We've got no education. No skills except the ones that get you arrested. Where exactly do you think we'd go?" Thomas hadn't answered. But Oliver had seen something in his friend's eyes that night, a hunger for something different, something clean. It scared him more than the violence ever had. Everything changed when Thomas met Rebecca. She was a student at the community college, working part-time at a coffee shop near their neighborhood. Thomas had gone in to get warm one winter afternoon and come out talking about a girl with kind eyes who'd given him free coffee and asked if he was okay. "She looked at me like I was a person," Thomas had said, wonder in his voice. "Not a threat, not a mark, just a person." Oliver had rolled his eyes, certain it was infatuation that would burn out quickly. But Thomas kept going back, kept talking to her. And slowly, something in him began to shift. Rebecca never asked what Thomas did for money. Maybe she knew, maybe she didn't want to know. But she represented something he'd never had. The possibility of a different life. A future that didn't end in prison or a body bag. "I'm getting out," Thomas told Oliver one night, 6 months after meeting Rebecca. They were sitting on the fire escape of their building, watching police lights flash somewhere in the distance. "I'm done with this." Oliver had felt something crack in his chest. "Just like that?" "Not just like that. I've been saving. Applied to a training program, HVAC repair. Got accepted." Thomas wouldn't look at him. "Rebecca doesn't know about any of this, and I want to keep it that way." "So you're just going to walk away? Pretend none of it happened?" "I'm going to try." Thomas finally met his eyes. "Come with me. We can both get out." Oliver had wanted to. God, he'd wanted to. But something held him back. Maybe pride, maybe fear, maybe the knowledge that he'd gone too far down this road to find his way back. He'd made choices Thomas hadn't, crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Someone has to stay," Oliver said quietly. "Clean up the loose ends. Make sure nobody comes looking for you." Thomas had gripped his shoulder, hard. "I don't want you doing that for me. I know." Oliver had forced a smile. "But I'm doing it anyway." They'd sat in silence for a while, both understanding that something was ending. A partnership, a brotherhood. The only family either of them had ever really known. "If you ever need anything," Oliver had said finally, "you call me. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter when. You call, and I come." Thomas had nodded, throat working. "Same goes for you. You ever want out, you ever need help, I know where to find you." Oliver had kept his word. He'd stayed behind, absorbed the debts Thomas left, smoothed over the complications that came with walking away from that life. It hadn't been easy. There were people who took leaving as betrayal, who saw Thomas's departure as weakness that needed to be punished. Oliver had handled them, quietly, definitively. He'd watched from a distance as Thomas built a new life, married Rebecca in a small ceremony Oliver attended from the back row, unnoticed. Had children, Jessica, then Jerry. Bought a modest house in a decent neighborhood. Became the kind of man who coached Little League and fixed neighbors' broken faucets, and never mentioned where he came from. Oliver had been proud, and grateful that at least one of them had made it out. They'd spoken occasionally over the years, brief calls, careful conversations that never went too deep. Thomas never asked about Oliver's life. Oliver never volunteered information, but the bond remained, stretched thin by distance and circumstance, but never fully broken. When Thomas got sick, Oliver had visited the hospital once. Just once. Thomas had looked at him with eyes hollowed by pain and chemotherapy and said 5 words that would define the rest of Oliver's life. "Promise me you'll protect them," Oliver had promised. And Oliver Cordero never broke a promise. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and despair. Oliver had been in plenty of hospitals before stitching up knife wounds in emergency rooms at 3 a.m., visiting associates who'd taken bullets meant for someone else, identifying bodies in basement morgues. But walking into Street Michael's oncology wing felt different. Heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. Thomas was in room 407, 4th floor, East Wing. Oliver had memorized the number from the text Rebecca had sent 3 days earlier. "He's asking for you. Please come." He'd put it off as long as he could not because he didn't care, but because seeing Thomas like this would make it real, would confirm that the boy who'd taught him how to pick locks and dream of something better was dying, and there wasn't enough money or muscle in the world to stop it. The door was slightly ajar. Oliver stood outside for a moment, gathering himself, then knocked softly. "Come in." Rebecca's voice, tired but steady. She sat in a chair beside the bed, holding Thomas's hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she'd been there for days without sleep. When she saw Oliver, something like relief crossed her face. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Oliver nodded, unable to speak. His eyes went to the bed. Thomas looked nothing like the man Oliver remembered. The cancer had hollowed him out, left him gaunt and pale, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily, measuring out what little life remained. But when his eyes opened and found Oliver standing there, they still held that familiar spark, the same determination that had carried them both through childhood. "You look terrible," Thomas said, his voice raspy but touched with humor. Oliver managed a smile. "You should see the other guy." Rebecca stood, squeezing Thomas's hand. "I'll give you two some time. I need coffee anyway." She paused at the door, looking back at Oliver. "Don't tire him out." When she was gone, silence settled over the room like snow. Oliver moved to the chair she'd vacated, sat down heavily. Up close, he could see how much effort it took for Thomas just to breathe. "How bad?" Oliver asked. "Weeks, maybe days." Thomas shifted slightly, wincing. "They stopped treatment last month. Nothing left to do but wait." Oliver's jaw tightened. "There are specialists, experimental trials. I can make calls." "No." Thomas's voice was firm despite its weakness. "I'm done, Oliver. I made my peace with it. Rebecca? She knows. The kids." Thomas's eyes glistened. "Jessica suspects. Jerry's too young to understand. That's probably a mercy." Oliver looked down at his hands. Hands that had done terrible things. Hands that couldn't fix this. "What do you need? Anything. You name it." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the hall, someone was crying. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I need you to protect them." Oliver had expected this, had known it was coming from the moment he got Rebecca's text. But hearing it said aloud still hit like a physical blow. "Of course," he said immediately. "I'll make sure Rebecca and the kids are taken care of. Financially, I mean. They won't struggle. It's not just money." Thomas struggled to sit up slightly, and Oliver helped adjust the pillows. "There are things from before. Loose ends I thought were tied up. People who might remember. Grudges that don't die just because I walked away." Oliver felt ice in his stomach. "Who?" "I don't know all of them. That's the problem." Thomas coughed, the sound wet and painful. When he caught his breath, he continued. "I made enemies, Oliver. You know I did. We both did. Most of them probably forgot or moved on. But some." He trailed off, eyes distant. "Some might see my death as an opportunity. Might think Rebecca knows something, or has access to something, or just might want to make her pay for my sins. That won't happen," Oliver said, his voice dropping into something harder, colder. "I'll make sure of it." "I know you will. That's why I'm asking." Thomas reached out, gripped Oliver's wrist with surprising strength. "But you have to promise me something else. Anything. Don't involve them in your world. Don't let them know what you do, what you are. Rebecca. She thinks you're a businessman. A legitimate one. Let her keep thinking that." Thomas's eyes were intense now, burning with the last of his strength. Give them normal, give them safe. That's all I ever wanted for them. Oliver felt something break inside his chest. You gave them that yourself. You got out, built a life worth living. Because you let me. Thomas's grip tightened. Because you stayed behind and dealt with everything I left undone. You think I don't know? You think I didn't hear the whispers, see the gaps where problems used to be? His voice cracked. You saved me, Oliver, long before this disease showed up. Now I'm asking you to save them. The weight of it settled over Oliver like a physical thing. This wasn't just about money or muscle. This was about becoming a ghost in their lives, present but invisible, protecting from a distance, never asking for acknowledgement or thanks. I promise, Oliver said, his voice rough. I'll handle every loose end, every old grudge, every debt, real or imagined. And I'll make sure Rebecca and the kids never have to look over their shoulders. He paused. They'll never know about the past. They'll never know about me. They'll just live. Thomas sagged back against the pillows, relief washing over his face. Thank you. They sat in silence for a while. Oliver wanted to say more, wanted to tell Thomas about all the memories they shared, about the brother he'd been, about the hole his absence would leave, but the words stuck in his throat. Rebecca returned 20 minutes later with terrible hospital coffee. She sensed something had shifted in the room but didn't ask. Oliver stood, nodded to both of them. I'll be in touch, he said. At the door, Thomas called out one last time. Oliver, he turned. You could still get out too, you know. It's not too late. Oliver smiled, sad, knowing. Yes, it is, but that's okay. He looked at Rebecca, then back to Thomas. Somebody has to stay behind and keep the wolves away. Thomas died 6 days later. Oliver kept his promise, or thought he had, until a man named Adam Eric walked into a restaurant and proved that some debts refused to stay buried. Adam Eric learned about injustice when he was 19 years old, standing in a courtroom watching his older brother get sentenced to 8 years for armed robbery. The judge had been matter-of-fact about it, reading from paperwork like he was ordering lunch instead of destroying a family. His brother Kyle, 23 and stupid enough to believe a quick score would solve their problems, had looked small in his orange jumpsuit, nothing like the confident man who'd raised Adam after their parents died. The defendant will serve his time at Riverbend Correctional Facility, the judge had said. Gavel down. Done. Adam had wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that Kyle had only gotten involved because someone had promised him easy money, that the whole thing had been a setup. But fairness, he learned that day, was a lie people told themselves to sleep better at night. The setup had been orchestrated by someone Kyle trusted, a guy named Thomas Lewis, who'd been part of the crew, who'd gotten cold feet at the last minute and walked away. Kyle had gone through with the job anyway, convinced Thomas would show up. He never did. Kyle got caught. Thomas disappeared. And Adam had spent the next 8 years visiting his brother in prison, watching him turn hard and hollow, until Kyle finally got shanked in the yard over a gambling debt 3 months before his release date. Adam had been 27 then, standing at his brother's grave with nothing but rage and a name, Thomas Lewis. He'd spent years looking for Thomas, not obsessively, but persistently, asking questions, following dead ends. The man had vanished like smoke, built a new life somewhere far from the consequences of his choices. Adam had almost given up, convinced Thomas was either dead or had left the state entirely. Then, 2 months ago, Adam had seen the obituary. Thomas Lewis, 46, passed away peacefully, surrounded by family after a courageous battle with cancer, survived by his loving wife Rebecca and children Jessica and Jerry. The address was listed for the funeral home, same city, same state. The bastard had been living 30 miles away the entire time, playing house while Kyle rotted in prison and eventually died there. Adam had gone to the funeral, stood in the back, watched the widow cry, saw the kids who didn't know their father had destroyed another family to build theirs. He'd wanted to confront them right there, wanted to scream the truth so everyone would know what kind of man they were mourning. But something had held him back. Maybe propriety, maybe cowardice. He'd left before the service ended, the rage inside him finding no outlet, no resolution. For weeks, it festered. Every time he drove past the neighborhood where Rebecca Lewis lived, he felt it growing, this gnawing sense that justice had been cheated, that the scales were still unbalanced. Kyle was dead. Thomas was dead. But Rebecca was alive. The kids were alive. They got to keep existing, keep moving forward, built on a foundation of betrayal and lies. It wasn't right. Adam knew people would call it misplaced anger, would say Rebecca wasn't responsible for her husband's choices. But Adam had learned long ago that family shared the burden of sin. He'd paid for Kyle's mistakes, his whole adult life, missed opportunities, damaged relationships, the weight of being known as the brother of that guy who got killed in prison. Why shouldn't Rebecca pay too? He'd followed her for a few weeks, not stalking, he told himself, just observing. Watched her drop the kids at school, work double shifts at the diner, count change in her car before going into the grocery store. She looked tired, defeated. Part of him felt satisfaction in that. Another part felt nothing at all. The restaurant had been coincidence. Adam went to Cordero's, sometimes upscale enough to feel like an accomplishment, cheap enough that he could afford it on his construction salary. He'd been having a bad day, his supervisor writing him about a deadline, his ex-girlfriend texting about money she claimed he owed. And then he'd seen her walk in. Rebecca Lewis, with her kids, dressed up like they were celebrating something. Something inside Adam had snapped. The unfairness of it crashed over him like a wave. Here she was, taking her children to a nice restaurant, probably paid for with money Thomas had earned through betrayal, while Adam ate alone, while Kyle's grave went unvisited because Adam couldn't afford the gas to drive out there every week. He'd ordered a beer, then another, watched them settle into a corner booth, watched the kids laugh at something Rebecca said, watched her relax slightly like she deserved peace, like she'd earned it. The anger built with each sip, each minute. By the time he stood up and walked toward their table, Adam had convinced himself this was necessary. Not revenge, justice. A reckoning that was long overdue. Remember me, Mrs. Lewis. The look on her face, confusion. Then fear had felt like vindication. Finally, she understood what it felt like to be vulnerable. To have the past come back when you thought you were safe. When he'd shoved her chair, heard the gasps from nearby tables, seen her pull those kids close like a shield, it had felt right. Powerful. Like he was correcting an imbalance in the universe. Your husband destroyed my family, he'd said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. He hadn't noticed the man in black approaching from behind. Hadn't registered the shift in the room's atmosphere, the way certain people's eyes had widened in recognition. He'd been too caught up in his own narrative of justified anger. When Oliver Cordero said his name, just his name, nothing else, Adam's entire world had collapsed. He knew that voice. Everyone in certain circles knew that voice. Oliver Cordero wasn't just connected, he was the connection. The man whose word moved money, ended careers, disappeared problems that needed disappearing, and Adam had just threatened someone under his protection. The realization hit like ice water. This wasn't justice. This was suicide. Mr. Cordero, he'd stammered, his righteous anger evaporating into pure survival instinct. I wasn't, but there were no words that would fix this. No explanation that would matter. Adam had violated rules he should have known existed, had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. When Oliver gave him 10 seconds to leave, Adam had taken 5. He'd actually run out of the restaurant and into the night, his heart hammering, his hands shaking. The injustice he'd felt so keenly moments before seemed suddenly trivial compared to the terror of what he'd almost brought down on himself. It was only later, sitting in his truck 3 blocks away, that Adam realized the cruelest truth of all. He'd never gotten justice for Kyle. He never would. And his attempt to claim it had only proven what he'd always feared, that in this world, power mattered more than fairness, and he had none. Oliver Cordero adjusted his cufflinks as he stepped out of the black sedan, the restaurant's warm light spilling onto the sidewalk through tall windows. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, exactly on time, as he always was. His driver, Ramon, moved to follow, but Oliver raised a hand. Wait here. This is personal, not business. Ramon nodded and settled back into the driver's seat. Oliver had brought him anyway old habits from a life where showing up anywhere alone was an invitation for problems. But tonight wasn't about power plays or territory disputes. Tonight was about keeping a promise to a dead man. He paused before entering, studying the restaurant through the glass. Cordero's wasn't his establishment despite the name coincidence that amused him, but he knew the owner had done enough favors over the years that his presence here carried weight. The staff would recognize him, so would certain patrons. That could be useful or problematic, depending on how the evening unfolded. Through the window, he spotted Rebecca's table in the corner. She sat with her back partially to him, Jessica beside her, Jerry across from them. The booth he'd specifically requested, quiet, private, but with clear sightlines to the entrance. Rebecca looked tense even from this distance, her shoulders tight, her hands fidgeting with the menu. He'd done that to her. The uncertainty, the anxiety of not knowing what this dinner really meant. Oliver felt a pang of guilt but pushed it aside. Better nervous than unprotected. He was about to push open the door when movement inside caught his attention. A man approaching Rebecca's table. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket and hoodie despite the restaurant's business-casual atmosphere, moving with the aggressive confidence of someone looking for confrontation. Oliver's hand froze on the door handle. His mind, trained by decades of reading situations before they exploded, processed everything in seconds. The man's posture, his trajectory, the way other diners were already shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't a waiter. Wasn't a friend. This was a problem. Oliver's expression didn't change. Years of practice had taught him to keep his face neutral, even when his mind was calculating angles and outcomes. He watched through the glass as the man reached Rebecca's table, saw her look up in confusion. Then the man shoved her chair backward. The restaurant froze. So did Oliver, but only for a heartbeat. Then he moved. He entered through the main door with the same measured pace he used for everything. Not rushing, not hesitating. Panic accomplished nothing. Control accomplished everything. The hostess started to greet him, but fell silent when she saw his face, stepping aside instinctively. Oliver's eyes never left the man's back as he crossed the dining room. He could hear the confrontation now. The man's voice carrying through the silence. "Your husband destroyed my family. Interesting." This was about Thomas. Then, Oliver cataloged the information automatically. Male, late 20s to early 30s. Personal grievance. Emotional rather than professional. Someone Thomas had wronged in the past or believed he had. Someone Oliver should have found and handled 2 years ago. His jaw tightened. This was his failure. He'd promised Thomas he would clean up every loose end, neutralize every potential threat. Clearly, he'd missed one. As he approached, Oliver studied the man more carefully. The slight sway in his stance suggested alcohol, not drunk, but working on it. The worn quality of his clothes spoke to working class, possibly struggling. The way he kept glancing around for validation from other diners revealed insecurity beneath the bravado. This wasn't a professional. This was a wounded man playing tough, convincing himself his pain justified cruelty. Oliver had dealt with 1,000 men like this. They were dangerous not because they were competent, but because they were unpredictable. Pain made people stupid. Grief made them reckless. He stopped directly behind the man, close enough that anyone with survival instincts would have felt his presence. The man didn't turn, too focused on Rebecca, on his performance of righteous anger. Oliver waited one more second, giving the man a chance to notice, to reconsider, to walk away on his own. But he didn't, so Oliver spoke. "Adam." Just the name, nothing else. But he said it the way he said everything important, quietly, clearly, with absolute certainty. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. The effect was immediate and total. Adam Eric went rigid like someone had poured concrete down his spine. The color drained from his face. His hands, which had been gesturing aggressively, dropped to his sides. Oliver watched him turn slowly, saw the exact moment recognition hit, saw bravado collapse into terror, saw a man realize he'd just made a catastrophic miscalculation. Mr. Cordero. Oliver didn't smile, didn't frown, kept his expression completely neutral, a blank canvas onto which Adam could project every fear his imagination could conjure. It was more effective than any threat. "You weren't what?" Oliver asked softly, picking up the thread of Adam's stammering excuse. "You weren't threatening a widow and her children in a public restaurant?" Adam's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Oliver let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen. Oliver was peripherally aware of the attention phones probably recording. Witnesses who would talk, that was fine. Let them watch. Let them see what happened when you violated his protection. "Rebecca Lewis and her children are under my protection," Oliver said, each word deliberate and precise. "They have been since the day her husband passed. You knew this. Or you should have." That last part was generous. Adam probably had no idea. But Oliver needed him to believe the ignorance was his own fault, that he should have known better, should have asked questions before acting. Fear worked better when people blamed themselves. "I didn't, no one told me." Adam's voice cracked. "I just wanted—" "What you wanted," Oliver interrupted, his tone still conversational, still quiet, "stopped mattering the moment you touched that chair." He stepped closer, not threatening, just closing distance. Adam flinched anyway. Oliver glanced past him to Rebecca. Their eyes met, and he saw confusion there, fear, and something else, recognition. She was putting pieces together, understanding that her husband's mysterious friend was something more, something dangerous. He owed her honesty. Later, after this was handled, "I promised him," Oliver said, still holding Rebecca's gaze, though the words were meant for Adam. "And I don't break promises." He turned his full attention back to Adam, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You have 10 seconds to leave this restaurant. You will not contact Mrs. Lewis again. You will not speak her name. You will not acknowledge her existence." He paused, letting it sink in. "Do you understand?" Adam nodded frantically. Yes, I understand. I'm sorry, 9 seconds." Adam ran. Oliver stood perfectly still, watching through the windows as Adam practically sprinted down the sidewalk and disappeared into the night. Only when he was certain Adam was gone did Oliver allow himself to exhale slowly. One problem solved. But looking at Rebecca's pale face, at Jessica's wide eyes and Jerry's confusion, Oliver knew another problem had just begun. They knew now. Not everything, but enough. The protection he'd promised Thomas had just become visible. And visibility always complicated things. The silence that followed Adam's retreat felt like a living thing, thick and uncomfortable, pressing against the skin of everyone in the restaurant. Conversations didn't resume immediately. Silverware remained frozen halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen staff had gone quiet, heads peeking through the service window to understand what had just happened. Oliver stood motionless in the center of it all, his presence commanding the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He was aware of the phones still recording, the whispered speculation beginning at nearby tables, the manager hovering uncertainly near the bar, but his focus was on the woman sitting in the corner booth, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 children who looked at him with expressions he'd seen 1,000 times before. The way people looked at things they didn't understand but instinctively knew to fear. He'd terrified them. Not intentionally, never intentionally, but the result was the same. Oliver moved slowly toward the table, each step deliberate, giving Rebecca time to process, to decide how she wanted to respond. He kept his hands visible, his posture open, non-threatening, despite the contradiction of what they'd just witnessed. When he reached the booth, he did something he rarely did for anyone. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eye level below Rebecca's, below the children's, a position of vulnerability, of deliberate submission. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His voice meant only for them. "I thought I'd handled everything." Rebecca stared at him, her face a complicated map of emotions, shock, confusion, fear, and something that might have been anger beginning to surface beneath the rest. Her hands remained on her children, one on Jessica's shoulder, one gripping Jerry's hand. "Who are you?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "I mean, I know your name. But who are you?" Oliver had prepared for this moment, had known it would come eventually. But preparation didn't make the truth easier to speak. "I'm someone your husband trusted," he said carefully. "Someone he asked to make sure you and the children stayed safe after he was gone." "Safe from what?" Rebecca's voice was gaining strength now, the initial shock wearing off. "From men in restaurants? From whatever that was?" She gestured toward the door where Adam had fled. "From the past," Oliver said simply. "Your husband had a life before you met him, before he became the man you knew. There were complications from that life, people who might have held grudges, debts, real or imagined, that could have come back to hurt you." Jessica, who'd been silent throughout, spoke up suddenly. "Are you in the Mafia?" The question was so direct, so childishly blunt, that Oliver almost smiled. "Almost." "Jessica," Rebecca started, but Oliver raised a hand gently. "It's a fair question." He looked at the 9-year-old, seeing the intelligence in her eyes, the way she was processing information faster than most adults. "I'm someone who helps people when they have problems the police can't solve. Sometimes that means I have to do things that aren't conventional." "That's not an answer," Jessica said. "No," Oliver admitted. "It's not. But it's the only one I can give you right now." Jerry, who'd been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly tugged on Oliver's sleeve. "Are you going to hurt us?" The question hit Oliver like a physical blow. He'd spent his entire adult life being feared, had cultivated that fear deliberately, used it as a tool, but hearing it from a 6-year-old boy, seeing the genuine worry in those innocent eyes, made something in his chest constrict painfully. "No," Oliver said, his voice rougher than intended. "Never. I'm here to make sure nobody hurts you. That's all. That's the only reason." "Because you promised our dad?" Jerry asked. "Yes. Was he your friend?" Oliver hesitated. Friend felt inadequate for what Thomas had been: brother, partner, the other half of a shared childhood that had forged them both in fire. But explaining that to a 6-year-old seemed impossible. He was my best friend, Oliver said finally. When we were kids, we took care of each other. When we grew up, he chose a different path than I did, a better one. But we never stopped caring about each other. Rebecca's expression had shifted during this exchange, some of the fear replaced by something more complex. Thomas never told me about you. Not really. Just mentions here and there. My friend Oliver. I thought you were a businessman. I am, Oliver said, just not the legal kind. And that man Adam, what did Thomas do to him? This was the dangerous part. The truth could shatter whatever image Rebecca still held of her late husband. But lying felt wrong, disrespectful to both her and Thomas's memory. I don't know the specifics, Oliver said honestly. Your husband walked away from his old life when he met you. He built something clean, something good. But there were people from before who felt abandoned, betrayed. Adam's brother was apparently one of them. Was Thomas a criminal? Rebecca's voice was steady, but Oliver could hear the fear beneath it, not of him, but of the answer. He made choices in a difficult situation, Oliver said carefully. We both did. We grew up with nothing, in a place where survival meant bending rules. Your husband bent them. Then he met you and decided to stop. He paused. I bent them too, but I never stopped. The honesty hung between them like smoke. So you're telling me, Rebecca said slowly, that my husband had some kind of criminal past? That you're some kind of… what? Crime boss? And you've been watching over us for 2 years without telling me any of this? Yes. Rebecca's laugh was sharp, almost hysterical. This is insane. This is… I don't even know what this is. It's protection, Oliver said quietly. It's me keeping a promise to a dying man that his family would never pay for his mistakes. That's all it's ever been. But we almost did. Rebecca's composure cracked, tears spilling over. That man was going to… he could have my children were right there. I know. Oliver's voice carried genuine regret. Adam Eric was a name that slipped through. A oversight on my part. It won't happen again. How can you promise that? Because I've spent 2 years identifying every person who might have had a connection to your husband's past. Every debt, every grudge, every loose thread. I thought I had them all. I was wrong about Adam, but I'm not wrong about the others. Oliver reached into his jacket slowly, making sure Rebecca saw the movement wasn't threatening, and pulled out an envelope. He set it on the table between them. Inside is everything you need to know. Accounts I've set up for the children's education. Contact information if you ever need help. Documentation of the debts I've settled on Thomas's behalf. He paused. And a letter he wrote you before he died. One he asked me to hold until you needed to understand. Rebecca stared at the envelope like it might explode. You don't have to open it now, Oliver said gently. But when you're ready, it will explain everything better than I can. He stood slowly, his knee protesting the position he'd held. Around them, the restaurant had begun to breathe again, cautious conversations resuming, the manager finally approaching to ask if everything was all right. I'll go, Oliver said. You and the children can finish your dinner in peace. It's already paid for. Order whatever you want. Wait. Rebecca's voice stopped him. This protection of yours, does it have an expiration date? Oliver met her eyes. No. The promise I made to Thomas doesn't end. Not ever, even though he's gone. Especially because he's gone. Oliver's expression softened slightly. He was the best of us, Rebecca. He got out. Built something real. Had a family worth protecting. The least I can do is make sure that family stays safe. Rebecca wiped her eyes, pulled her children closer. I don't know if I should thank you or tell you to leave us alone. You don't have to decide tonight, Oliver said. Take your time. Read the letter. And know that whether you want my help or not, you have it. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Jessica and Jerry. Your father was a good man. Whatever else you hear, whatever you learn about his past, remember that. He loved you more than anything. Jerry nodded solemnly. Jessica just watched him with those 2 intelligent eyes, still processing, still deciding what to believe. Oliver walked out of Cordero's into the cool night air, where Ramon waited with the car. As they pulled away from the curb, Oliver looked back at the restaurant one last time. Through the window, he saw Rebecca opening the envelope with shaking hands. The truth was finally out. Now they would all have to live with it. Oliver sat in the back of the sedan as Ramon navigated the evening traffic, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. He should have felt relief Adam Eric had been handled. Rebecca and the children were safe, the immediate threat neutralized. Instead, he felt the weight of unfinished business pressing against his chest like a stone. Adam Eric had run, yes. But running didn't mean forgetting. Fear faded with distance and time, and desperate men did stupid things when they convinced themselves they had nothing left to lose. "Where to, boss?" Ramon asked, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Oliver was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. It was answered on the second ring. "It's me," Oliver said. "I need information on someone. Adam Eric, late 20s, early 30s. Brother named Kyle who did time at Riverbend. Died inside about 5 years ago. I want everything: current address, employment, associations, debts, routines, and I want it tonight." He ended the call and stared out the window. Thomas had asked him to clean up the past, to make sure it never touched his family. Oliver had failed once. He wouldn't fail again. By midnight, Oliver had what he needed. Adam Eric lived in a rundown apartment complex on the east side, worked construction, had a DUI on his record, and an ex-girlfriend with a restraining order. No criminal organization ties, no backup. Just a man alone with his grief and anger, dangerous only because he had nothing to lose. Oliver made one more call. "I need a conversation arranged," he said to the voice on the other end. "Quiet, private, tomorrow morning. Location? The construction site where he works. Before his shift starts. Understood." Oliver hung up and finally allowed himself to go home, a penthouse apartment downtown that felt more like a hotel room than a residence. Expensive furniture he'd never chosen himself, art on the walls picked by an interior designer. Everything perfect and nothing personal. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city he'd spent his entire adult life learning to control. From up here, it looked peaceful, clean, the violence and desperation invisible from this height. Thomas used to joke that Oliver would end up alone in a tower somewhere, king of nothing that mattered. Oliver had laughed it off back then. Tonight, the joke felt less funny. He thought about Rebecca's face in the restaurant, the fear, the confusion, the moment she'd realized her entire understanding of her late husband's life had been built on incomplete information. He'd done that to her. Shattered whatever peace she'd managed to build from grief, but better shattered and safe than peaceful and dead. Oliver finished his drink and went to bed, though sleep came slowly. The construction site was quiet at 6 a.m. Just the early morning crew setting up equipment and checking materials. Adam Eric arrived at 6:15. Lunch pail in hand, looking like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. Oliver was waiting by Adam's truck, not hiding, not threatening, just standing there in the dawn light like he had every right to be. 2 of his associates flanked him at a respectful distance, visible but not aggressive. Adam saw him and stopped dead, the color draining from his face for the second time in 12 hours. "Mr. Cordero," he said, voice tight. I left like you said. I haven't." "I know," Oliver said calmly. "You left. You've been home since. No calls to Rebecca. No attempts at contact." He tilted his head slightly. "You followed instructions. That's good." Adam's hands clenched around his lunch pail. "Then why are you here?" "Because fear fades," Oliver said simply. "And I need to make sure this conversation lasts longer than your memory of being scared." Adam swallowed hard. Around them, the construction site continued its morning routine, workers deliberately not looking their direction. They knew better than to witness things that weren't their business. "I want you to understand something," Oliver continued, his voice conversational despite the weight of his words. "Your brother's death was tragic. I'm not dismissing that. Grief makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise do. I understand that too. But, Oliver said, the word cutting through Adam's attempt to speak. Your brother made choices. Thomas Lewis made choices. Both of them paid consequences. Your brother paid with his life. Thomas paid by walking away from everything he knew, by spending years looking over his shoulder, by dying slowly and painfully while his family watched. He paused. The debt, if there ever was one, is settled. That's not. It is. Oliver's tone remained calm but carried absolute finality. And what happened last night? That was you trying to collect on a debt that doesn't exist. You threatened a woman and 2 children because you needed somewhere to put your anger. That's not justice. That's just cruelty. Adam's jaw worked, emotions playing across his face. Shame, anger, grief, resignation. So what now? You gonna kill me? Make me disappear? Oliver almost smiled. Almost. No. I'm going to give you a choice. Adam blinked. A choice? You can leave. Not the city, I'm not that cruel. But you leave Rebecca Lewis and her children alone. Forever. You don't look for them. You don't talk about them. You don't think about them. They cease to exist in your world. Oliver's eyes were steady, measuring. In return, I make sure your brother's grave gets properly maintained. Fresh flowers every month. The headstone you couldn't afford to replace, replaced. And a trust fund set up for any children you might have someday, so they don't grow up the way you and Kyle did. Adam stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you do that? Because your brother deserved better than he got. Because you deserved better than you got. Because I know what it's like to grow up with nothing and watch the system fail everyone you love. Oliver's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes, old pain. Carefully contained. But none of that gives you the right to hurt innocent people. Especially children. And if I say no, then I handle this a different way. Oliver didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Around them, the construction site hummed with activity, hammers, saws, the beep of backing equipment, normal life continuing while extraordinary negotiations happened in its shadow. Finally, Adam nodded. I'll stay away. Say it properly, Oliver said. So we're both clear. Adam took a breath. I'll leave Rebecca Lewis and her children alone. Forever. They don't exist to me anymore. Good. Oliver pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it over. Information about the trust fund and the grave maintenance. It starts today. You'll get quarterly statements proving I'm keeping my end. Adam took the envelope with shaking hands, stared at it like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. One more thing, Oliver said quietly. If you ever break this agreement, if you so much as drive past their house or mention their names to anyone, the offer disappears. And so do you. Understand? Yes. Then we're done here. Oliver turned to leave, his associates following, then paused. Your brother was 23 when he died? Yeah. Same age Thomas and I were when we decided who we wanted to be, Oliver said, almost to himself. Kyle didn't get that chance. Make sure you do. He walked away, leaving Adam standing by his truck, holding an envelope that represented both mercy and warning. By the time Oliver's sedan pulled away from the construction site, the sun had fully risen. He pulled out his phone and sent a brief text to the contact who'd provided Adam's information. Matter closed. No further action required. The response came immediately. Understood. Oliver leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building since the previous evening. One loose end tied off. One promise kept. One more piece of Thomas's past buried properly. Back to the office, boss? Ramon asked. No, Oliver said quietly. Home. I need to sleep. But even as he said it, he knew sleep would be difficult, because somewhere across the city, Rebecca Lewis was reading a letter from her dead husband, learning truths that would change everything she thought she knew. And Oliver had no idea how she would react when she finished. Rebecca sat at her kitchen table long after the children had gone to bed. The letter spread out before her like evidence at a crime scene. She'd read it 3 times already, but the words still didn't feel real. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Oliver has decided you need to understand. I wish I could be there to explain in person, to see your face and answer your questions. But since I can't, I'll try to put everything down here as clearly as possible. Before I met you, I was someone else. Not a different person exactly, but a different version of myself, harder, angrier, making choices I'm not proud of. Oliver and I grew up together in a neighborhood where survival meant compromising your morals or starving. We chose survival. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she turned to the second page. Thomas's handwriting, already shaky from the illness, became harder to read as the letter progressed. I won't detail everything we did. Some of it, you can probably guess. Some of it, I hope you never learn. But I want you to know that I never hurt anyone who didn't hurt us first. I never stole from people who couldn't afford to lose. I tried to have lines I wouldn't cross, even when crossing them would have been easier. When I met you, everything changed. You looked at me like I was worth something, like I could be better than I was. And I wanted to be that person, the one you saw when you looked at me. So I walked away, left that life behind. Oliver helped me do it, cleaned up the messes I left, made sure nobody came looking for revenge. A tear splashed onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. Rebecca wiped her eyes, but more tears followed. I know this is a lot to process. I know you probably feel betrayed, lied to, and you have every right to feel that way. But I need you to understand something. Everything I built with you was real. Our home, our children, our life together, that wasn't a cover or a lie. That was me finally becoming the person I was always supposed to be. Oliver is a good man, Rebecca. I know that sounds strange given what he does, given the world he operates in, but he has honor. He keeps his word. When I asked him to protect you and the children after I'm gone, I knew he would do it no matter what it cost him. Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her pajamas and rubbing her eyes. Mom, why are you crying? Rebecca quickly wiped her face, tried to compose herself. Just reading something your father wrote. Come here, sweetheart. Jessica climbed into her lap, too big for it really, but still young enough to want the comfort. She looked at the letter curiously but didn't ask to read it. Is it true? Jessica asked quietly. What that man said? About Dad? Rebecca took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Your father made some mistakes when he was younger, before he met me, but he spent his whole life trying to be better, trying to build something good for us. And he did. She hugged Jessica tighter. The father you knew, the one who helped with homework and made terrible jokes and loved you more than anything, that was the real him. And Mr. Cordero? He was your father's friend, someone who helped him leave his old life behind, someone who's trying to keep a promise to protect us. Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing. Are we in danger? No, Rebecca said firmly. We're safe. Mr. Cordero made sure of that. Do you trust him? Did she? Rebecca thought about the man who'd knelt beside their table, who'd spoken to her children with genuine gentleness despite the violence he'd just prevented, who'd carried this secret for 2 years, protecting them from the shadows without ever asking for thanks or acknowledgement. I think I'm starting to, Rebecca said finally. Jessica nodded and yawned. Okay. Can I go back to bed? Of course, baby. Rebecca kissed the top of her head. Love you. Love you too, Mom. After Jessica left, Rebecca returned to the letter. Only one paragraph remained. I don't expect you to forgive me for not telling you all of this while I was alive. I was a coward about it, afraid of what you'd think, afraid of losing you even as I was already dying. But I hope you can understand why I asked Oliver to watch over you. I hope you'll let him keep his promise. And I hope, somehow, you and the children can have the peaceful life I always wanted for you. I love you, Rebecca. I always have. I always will. Yours forever, Thomas. Rebecca folded the letter carefully, her tears finally slowing. The weight in her chest hadn't disappeared, the grief, the confusion, the strange new understanding of who her husband had been, but something had shifted. The fear was less now, the uncertainty less paralyzing. She stood up, poured herself a glass of water, and looked at the clock. Nearly midnight. In the morning, she'd call Oliver. They needed to talk, properly this time, without the chaos of a restaurant confrontation. She had questions, dozens of them. But tonight, she just needed to sit with this new reality, to grieve again not for the husband who died, but for the version of him she'd thought she knew. To make peace with the fact that love could be complicated, that people could be more than one thing, that the man who'd hurt others in his past could also be the man who'd loved her completely. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows. Somewhere, Oliver Cordero was probably awake too, wondering what she'd decided, whether she'd accept his protection or push him away. Rebecca looked at the letter one more time, then placed it carefully in a drawer where the children wouldn't find it. Some truths they could learn later, when they were older and could understand nuance. For now, they deserved to remember their father simply. Tomorrow would bring new complications, new conversations, new adjustments. But tonight, Rebecca Lewis felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not quite peace, but a step toward it. A sense that maybe, despite everything, she and her children were going to be okay. Rebecca called Oliver at 9:30 the next morning, after the children had left for school, and she'd spent an hour staring at her phone, rehearsing what to say. He answered on the second ring. Rebecca, we need to talk, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere public. Of course. Name the place. The coffee shop on Maple Street. The one near the community center. I know it. When? Now, if you can. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The coffee shop was nearly empty mid-morning. just a few people on laptops and an elderly couple sharing a muffin. Rebecca had already secured a corner table, 2 cups of coffee waiting when Oliver arrived. He looked different in daylight, without the dramatic tension of the restaurant confrontation. More human, somehow. Despite the expensive clothes and careful composure, he sat down across from her without speaking, waiting for her to set the tone. "I read the letter," Rebecca said. And I'm angry," she met his eyes directly. "At Thomas for not telling me. At you for keeping the secret. At the whole situation." Oliver nodded slowly. "That's fair. But I also understand why he did it. Why you did it." Rebecca wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, needing something to hold on to. "He wanted to protect me from his past. You were honoring his wishes. I was trying to. The man last night, Adam, is he handled?" "Yes. He won't bother you again." "How can you be sure?" Oliver's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Because I gave him a reason to move on, and consequences if he doesn't." Rebecca didn't ask for details. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. "I have questions," she said. "A lot of them. About Thomas's past, about what you do, about what this protection really means. I'll answer what I can. Did my husband kill anyone?" Oliver was quiet for a moment. "Not that I know of. Thomas's crimes were mostly financial. Theft, fraud, money laundering. He was good with numbers, good at seeing angles. The violence was more my specialty. The casual way he said it should have been frightening. Instead, Rebecca found it almost refreshing, no lies, no sugarcoating. "And you? How many people have you killed?" "I don't keep count," Oliver said quietly. "And I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I've done terrible things, Rebecca. I'll probably do more before my life ends, but I've never hurt anyone who didn't choose to enter my world, and I've never touched innocence. Until last night, when you terrified my children." Oliver's jaw tightened. "That's the one thing I regret. I never wanted them to see that side of things. But Adam forced my hand." Rebecca studied him, this man who'd been a ghost in her life for 2 years. "Thomas trusted you. That has to mean something. It meant everything to me. Then I'm going to choose to trust you too. Not completely, not yet, but enough." She took a breath. "I need to know the protection continues, not just from random threats, but from this whole world you operate in. I need to know my children will never be pulled into it." "They won't be. You have my word. And your word means something?" "It's the only thing that does." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Okay. Then here are my terms. You protect us, but from a distance. No more surprise dinners. No more envelope deposits. If something happens that I need to know about, you tell me directly. No more secrets." "Agreed. And my children, they don't get involved. Ever. I don't care what the situation is. That was always the plan." "Good." Rebecca surprised herself by reaching across the table, briefly touching his hand. "Thank you. For keeping him safe long enough to build a life with me. For keeping us safe after he was gone. I know I don't understand everything about your world, but I understand loyalty, and yours is rare." Oliver looked at her hand on his, something shifting in his carefully controlled expression. "He loved you more than anything. Used to talk about you and the kids constantly. How Jessica was getting good at math. How Jerry learned to ride his bike. He'd show me pictures on his phone like a proud parent at a PTA meeting. A ghost of a smile. It drove me crazy sometimes, but it also reminded me why I did what I did. Why I stayed in this life so he could leave it. Do you ever wish you'd left too?" "Every day," Oliver admitted. "But someone has to stay. Someone has to handle the things that need handling. Might as well be me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the strange new dynamic of their relationship. Not quite friends, not quite strangers. Something in between, bound by a promise to a dead man and a shared desire to protect what he'd left behind. "One more thing," Rebecca said. "The envelope you gave me last night. The accounts for the children's education, that's too much. It's what Thomas would have wanted." "Maybe. But I don't want my children growing up thinking money solves everything, or that they're entitled to things they didn't earn." Oliver considered this. "What if it's structured as scholarships, merit-based? They have to maintain grades, stay out of trouble. Think of it as Thomas investing in their future, not buying it." Rebecca smiled slightly. "That I can live with. Then that's how we'll do it." Outside the coffee shop windows, life continued its normal rhythm. Cars passed, people walked dogs, the world spinning on, indifferent to the quiet negotiations happening over coffee in a corner booth. Rebecca finished her cup and stood. I should go. I have a shift this afternoon. Oliver stood as well. If you need anything, I know, I'll call. She turned to leave, then paused. Oliver? One last question. Yes? Are there others? Other people from Thomas's past who might show up? No. Adam was the last one. I've been thorough. Good. Rebecca adjusted her purse strap. Because I'm tired of surprises, and my children deserve to just be children for a while. They will be. That's the promise. Rebecca nodded and walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter than she had in days. The grief hadn't disappeared, it never would, but the fear had receded, replaced by something steadier, something that felt almost like hope. Behind her, Oliver remained in the coffee shop, finishing his own cup and thinking about promises kept and futures protected. Somewhere across the city, Jessica and Jerry were in school, learning fractions and state capitals, blissfully unaware of the conversations happening on their behalf. And in a cemetery on the east side of town, Thomas Lewis rested beneath a simple headstone, his family safe, his debts settled, his legacy protected by the one person who understood what it meant to keep a promise even after death. The world continued turning, and in its turning, a widow and her children moved forward into whatever tomorrow would bring, not fearless, but protected, not perfect, but safe, and sometimes that was enough. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.